We had a word for it in our language. Velshan, it means, the moment a prey species stops running. Every civilization in the compact had experienced this, the calculation that happens when a cornered creature looks up at you, bleeding, outnumbered, and makes a decision. The decision is always the same. The math is always the same. Surrender is survivable. Fighting back is not. We understood Velshan. We had protocols for it. De-escalation procedures. Containment ethics. A whole chapter in the Compact Codex dedicated to managing the surrender of lesser species with minimal trauma to either side. Earth did not read the Codex. I know this now. I have known it since the siege of the Kareth Line, since the third week of what Command officially called a pacification operation, and what my staff sergeant, a four-armed logistics officer with a talent for understatement, called the worst idea the Compact has had since the Dravari incident. What I am about to tell you happened over 11 days. The 9th Expansion Fleet. 412 warships. The full weight of a civilization that had not lost a ground campaign in 300 years. And 1 human. Then, 12. Then, by the end, something I still do not have a word for. We went to Earth to end a rebellion. We left understanding, for the first time, what the word monster actually means. Not the way they mean it. The way we do, now. This is my account. Filed under duress, partially redacted by Command, and subsequently leaked, because some things should not stay classified. Because some things need to be said plainly, in words even a compact bureaucrat can understand. You woke them up asterisk that was your mistake asterisk that was ours asterisk the first soldier I ever saw die from a wound that should not have killed anything was a Drenai shock trooper named Veloric. He was the best soldier in 3rd Company. He had survived the Outer Rim campaigns, 2 decompression events, and a close-range plasma discharge that left him with a scar the shape of a crescent across his upper thorax, which he considered a mark of distinction, and which he showed to new recruits along with a lengthy and largely embellished account of how he had earned it. He died on the 4th day of the pacification operation. He died because a human planted a small explosive device inside a drainage conduit 6 meters below the surface of a city called, I am rendering this phonetically, because their language still gives my translation matrix irregular fits, Moscow. It was a city of approximately 12 million. It was also, according to our initial assessments, a city that had been given 48 hours to surrender. They had not surrendered. Veloric did not die from the explosion. He survived that. He survived it the way soldiers survive things, badly, with pieces of him in places pieces should not be, but alive. He died 3 days later from something their medics called sepsis, a condition where the body's internal defense system, overwhelmed by infection, turns on the organism itself. Our medical officers were not familiar with this. We had not encountered a pathogen environment sophisticated enough to produce it. Earth, it turns out, had been producing it for approximately 4 billion years. It was considered a routine hazard. I wrote Veloric's name in my log the way I write everything, 3 times, for permanence. Then, I sat in the command post for a long time listening to the ambient noise of a city that was not, under any metric I could apply to it, behaving like a city that had been told to surrender. My name is Auric Velsen. I hold the rank of Secondary Strategos in the compact 9th Expansion Fleet. I have a habit, which my superiors have noted in several performance evaluations with varying degrees of diplomatic language, of recording everything. Not just official logs. Everything. The sound the ventilation makes when the filtration cycles. The exact phrasing of orders I receive that I find ambiguous. The number of times my second-in-command taps the side of his helmet when he is choosing between 2 answers he does not like. 11 taps. That was the day we landed. I mention this because it matters, what I noticed and when. It matters because what I am going to tell you requires you to understand the gap, the very specific, very measurable gap, between what we expected to find on this planet and what we actually found. What we expected, a species in the early stages of spacefaring development, politically fragmented, technologically inferior to compact standards by approximately 3 centuries, recently informed of their status as an annexed territory under the compact expansion mandate. A species that had, by every behavioral projection model we possessed, a 94.7% probability of accepting annexation terms within the standard 48-hour compliance window. What we found: the drainage conduit. Velorak. A city that had, in 48 hours, converted approximately 60% of its civilian infrastructure into something that did not have a clean category in our tactical database. Not a military installation. Not quite. Something in between. Something that had been, 72 hours ago, a transit hub, a water treatment facility, a residential block, and a government administrative center, and was now, somehow, all of those things and also a weapons network. I asked the intelligence officer how they had accomplished this. He told me he did not know. I asked him to estimate. He said they repurposed the transit tunnels as concealed movement corridors. The water treatment pumps are being used to flood choke points on our advance routes. The administrative center's power grid has been rerouted to boost the range of their communications equipment. And the residential blocks, he stopped. The residential blocks? I prompted. They're still occupied, he said. We can't tell which buildings are fortified and which are not because they all look the same. From above. From sensors. The heat signatures are, he tapped his helmet. I counted. 4 taps. They're cooking, he said. They're all cooking. The heat signature difference between a family preparing a meal and a weapons cache is 4 more taps. We can't distinguish them. I thought about this for a while. Then, I thought about the 48-hour compliance window. About the 94.7% probability. About the behavioral projection models that 17 analysts and a dedicated computational array had produced over the 3 months preceding this operation. I thought about how those models had been built, and what data had informed them. I thought about the species we had previously encountered in this arm of the galaxy, the Dravari, the Solen Collective, the Maith, and how each of them had, in fact, complied within the standard window. Some within hours. The Dravari had sent a formal delegation within 6. I pulled up the behavioral projection model and looked at it for a long time. It had no entry for cooking while under siege. It had no framework for what it meant that they were feeding themselves, maintaining domestic routines. Inside buildings they had also turned into weapons infrastructure. The model understood civilian population and military resistance as 2 separate categories with a transition state between them. It did not have a column for both simultaneously as a matter of apparent normalcy. I logged this. 3 times, 4 permanents. Then, I went to see the prisoner. We had taken one on the 2nd day. The operation's first, and, so far only, human captive. She had been found in a collapsed section of tunnel with a broken leg and a device we had initially categorized as a communication unit and subsequently recategorized as something we were still arguing about. She was approximately 32 years of age by their biological reckoning. She had dark hair, pale skin, and the specific quality of stillness that I had, in the Compact's many pacification operations, learned to associate with people who were choosing very carefully what to reveal. Her name, according to the identification documents we found on her, was Nowak. The first name rendered phonetically is Marta, which my translation matrix flagged as a common designation of Polish origin, which is a geographic cultural classification from a political entity that had, according to our historical data, ceased to exist as a separate political body approximately 80 years prior. She still used the name. I noted this without knowing, at the time, why it seemed significant. She was sitting against the wall of the containment room when I entered. The broken leg had been set and splinted by our medical officer, Standard Humanitarian Protocol, Compact Codex Section 14, and she had her arms folded across her chest and was looking at the far wall with the specific quality of attention that suggested she was not seeing the wall at all. She was somewhere else entirely. Running calculations, maybe. Planning something. She looked at me when I entered and said nothing. I sat down across from her. I had brought a datapad with a translation matrix already loaded. I said, in her language, it came out slightly flat, my translation matrix still smoothing the idiomatic edges, my name is Auric. I am the commanding officer of the ground operation currently in progress in your city. She said, I know who you are. Her accent was different from the translation matrix's rendering. Rougher at the edges. She used contractions the way humans apparently always do, compressed syllables, elisions, the grammar of a species that speaks as though they are always slightly short of time. Then, I said that I would find it useful to understand certain things about the resistance currently ongoing. Bet you would, she said. I looked at her. The translation matrix offered 3 possible interpretations of bet you would, and I filed all 3 and chose to continue. The 48-hour compliance window has passed, I said. The compact has authority under the expansion mandate to, is that what you call it, she said. Not a question. The flatness of it registered on 3 of my sensory systems simultaneously and I had to recalibrate. What would you call it, I said. She looked at me for a moment. Something moved through her expression that I did not have a category for. It was not anger, exactly. It was I reached for concepts. It was the specific quality of someone who has already finished grieving and has arrived somewhere on the other side of it. Past grief. Past calculation. At a destination I did not have a name for. Invasion, she said. I did not respond immediately. I was thinking about the behavioral projection models. About the fact that this woman, with a broken leg, alone in a containment room, in a city under siege by 412 warships, had just corrected my terminology with the patient certainty of someone who expected to win. You are aware, I said, that your city cannot hold indefinitely. Everything's temporary, she said. Including you. I sat with that for approximately 4 seconds, which in my species is the equivalent of a very long pause. You're not going to tell me anything useful, I said. I already did, she said, and looked back at the wall. I went back to the command post and thought about what she had told me. The intelligence officer was waiting. He had more heat signature data. He had also, in my absence, received a report from the Southern Advance Team that I found, I am going to use a word that my superior officers would consider insufficiently professional for an official log, but I am recording this for accuracy, alarming. The Southern Advance Team had attempted to move through what our maps identified as a commercial district. The route had been confirmed clear by 3 separate aerial drone passes. No weapons signatures. No elevated heat. No movement. They had been ambushed anyway. Not by the method I would have expected. Not by concealed weapons positions or prepared explosives. They had been ambushed by the street itself. The humans had, and I am going to take a moment here to describe this clearly, because I want the record to reflect that I am not editorializing, I am transcribing. They had, at some point in the preceding 48 hours, detached the surface paving material from a 3-block stretch of the commercial district and replaced it with a layer of loose aggregate over a concealed drop. Not a pit. Not deep enough to be lethal. Deep enough to collapse the footing of a soldier in armored kit and slow an advance by approximately 4 minutes per casualty. 4 minutes. The intelligence officer looked at me. I looked at him. He tapped his helmet. I counted 11. Back to 11. They spent time on this, I said. In 48 hours, they spent time dismantling a street to slow us by 4 minutes. Yes, sir. What do 4 minutes accomplish for them? We're not sure yet, sir. I pulled up the map of the southern advance route. I looked at the 3-block stretch. I looked at what came after the 3-block stretch. I looked at the building on the corner, a large structure, formerly a transit hub, now recategorized in our intelligence database as unknown function, active thermal signature. I stared at the map for a long time. They don't need us slowed in that spot, I said. Not specifically. They need us to know we can be slowed. They need us to hesitate before the next block, and the one after, and every block after that. The intelligence officer said nothing. They turn 4 minutes, I said, into 4 minutes per block, times every block in this city, times every advance team we have. They turned a tactical inconvenience into a psychological operation. I looked at the map. How many people does it take to tear up 3 blocks of pavement in 48 hours? He checked his data. Estimate based on area, 40 to 60 individuals. Civilians? We can't confirm military designation on any of them. 40 to 60 people. Not soldiers, not necessarily. People with no formal military training who had, in 48 hours, calculated exactly how to make 400 soldiers hesitate for the rest of the operation. I logged this 3 times. Then, I looked at the containment room on my secondary screen, the woman, Nowak, still sitting against the wall, still looking at nothing, and I thought about the word she had used. Invasion *, like she was explaining something to me. Patiently. Something I should already know. The attack on the northern perimeter happened at 0300 local time. I had been awake. I keep odd cycles, another thing the performance evaluations mention, usually with the phrase metabolic irregularity, and I had been reviewing the day's sensor logs with a cup of what the compact field ration system calls warm nutrient suspension and what my colleagues call punishment in liquid form and what I had learned, by this point in my career, to drink without tasting. The attack was not what I expected. What I expected was a massed assault on a weak point. Coordinated forces, a breach attempt, the kind of operation that our tactical doctrine was designed to repel. We had, in fact, been waiting for it. Our defensive positioning was optimized for it. We were, by any reasonable military assessment, prepared. They attacked a supply depot. Not with troops. With 3 humans, moving on foot, in the dark, through a sector our sensors had cleared twice in the preceding 4 hours. They were inside the perimeter for 11 minutes. They damaged 4 power conduits, destroyed 6 days of ration stores, and left. 3 humans. 11 minutes. 2 of our perimeter sensors flagged anomalous heat signatures that our automated systems had logged as ambient variation, ground temperature fluctuation, no action required. They had covered themselves with "I am transcribing this from the forensic report and I want the record to reflect that I triple-checked before including it" mud. Thermal insulating mud. From the river, approximately 3 kilometers from the perimeter. They had walked to the river, covered themselves in mud, walked back, penetrated a defended perimeter in armored positions, caused significant logistical damage, and left. Our automated systems had not flagged them because their thermal signatures were, due to the mud, within the ambient temperature range of the surrounding terrain. I held the forensic report for a long time after reading it. I was thinking about something Veloric had said once, in a conversation I had no business remembering as clearly as I do but, which has been available to my recollection with uncomfortable precision ever since, the worst soldiers are the ones who've been trained too well. They know exactly what an attack looks like, so they only look for the things they know. Veloric had been talking about a Drenai battle doctrine failure 2 campaigns ago. He had not been talking about this. He had still, somehow, described it exactly. I went to the containment room at 0400. Nowak was awake. She was sitting in the same position. I was beginning to suspect she slept in that position, or possibly did not sleep at all. "Mud," I said. She looked at me. "You covered yourselves with mud," I said. "To defeat thermal sensors." "That is, how old is that technique?" She thought about it. Genuine consideration, not performance. "Older than writing," she said. I sat down. The performance evaluations would have had something to say about my composure at this moment. I was not composing myself. I was sitting across from a woman with a broken leg and thinking about a civilization that had been, for longer than my species had possessed writing, encoding thermal concealment techniques into the basic knowledge set of its warriors. "How many more of them are there?" I said. "Like the ones who hit the depot." "Like what, exactly?" she said. "Willing to," I stopped. I was looking for the right word. Willing to improvise did not cover it. Willing to use what is available. Willing to use knowledge that predates their own recorded history as a functional tactical asset in a modern conflict. I did not have the word. I told her that. She looked at me with an expression that was, I logged it as assessment, not unkind, exactly, but the way you look at something you are measuring. "We have a word for it," she said. Several, actually. What are they? She thought again. Then, she said, surviving. I went back to the command post. I ordered a full review of all automated sensor parameters. I requested updated analysis on every cleared sector. I increased the perimeter complement and reassigned 3 drone units. Then, I sat down with my warm nutrient suspension and the forensic report and the day's sensor logs, and I thought very carefully about the woman in the containment room and what it meant that the most useful intelligence I had gathered in 4 days of operation had come from a prisoner with a broken leg who had told me almost nothing. She had told me one thing, though. She had told me it 4 days in. She had told me before the mud, before the pavement, before the drainage conduit and Veloric and the cooking and the heat signatures. Everything's temporary. Including you, asterisk. I had thought, at the time, that she was being defiant. That she was performing confidence she did not possess, the way cornered species sometimes did, the threat display of the weak, trying to buy time or dignity. I had been wrong about that. She had not been performing. She had been informing. I was beginning to understand the difference. I did not write that in the log. I thought about it for a long time, in the way that some thoughts need to settle before they can be named, and I drank the warm nutrient suspension without tasting it, and I stared at the map of a city that had, in 4 days, taken every definition I possessed of compliance and resistance and civilian and military and rearranged them into something I did not yet recognize. Outside, the city was quiet. The hum of their electrical grid running, still running, despite everything, was a frequency my secondary auditory system could just barely detect above the ambient noise of the command post. They were still cooking. Somewhere, in the buildings we could not distinguish, people were still cooking. I logged that too. 3 times. I did not know why it felt like the most important thing I had recorded all day. It did, though. It did. End of day 4. On day 5, we lost contact with Bravo Advance Team for 11 minutes. When they re-established, the team leader, a senior field officer named Vson, who I trusted with a conviction I did not often extend to field officers, gave me a report that I am going to reproduce here in full, because summarizing it would lose something essential. She said, we were moving through Sector 9, clearance confirmed, no contacts. At approximately 1400 we entered a residential block. Standard sweep pattern. We were 20 meters into the block when the humans came out. Out of what? I said. The buildings, she said. The civilian buildings. They came out of the buildings and stood in the street. Armed? No, she said. They were not armed. They had children with them. Families. They stood in the street and looked at us. I held the comm unit. And we halted, she said. There was something in her voice I had not heard from Vson before. Something careful. Protocol 7: avoid civilian casualties, halt advance in presence of unshielded non-combatants. We halted. We waited for them to move. They didn't move, I said. No, she said. They stood there. For 11 minutes. They looked at us. Some of them, there was an older female in the front who looked at me specifically. She looked at me for 11 minutes. I waited. Sir, she said, I have been on 14 pacification operations. I have never. They knew the protocol. They knew our rules of engagement. They stood there so we would stop. They used their own families, their children, as a delay mechanism. And she stopped. What? They didn't look afraid, she said. That's the part one can't log correctly. They looked like they were standing in line for something. Patient. The older woman looked at me and she looked like she felt sorry for me. I was quiet for a moment. What happened then? They moved, she said. After 11 minutes, they went back inside. We continued the sweep. The block was empty. Whatever had been there was gone. She paused. 11 minutes was enough. I looked at the map. I looked at the supply depot report. The pavement. The drainage conduit. Velorak. The mud. I thought about the behavioral projection model and its 94.7% probability. I thought about 17 analysts and a computational array and 3 months of preparation. I thought about the Dravari, who had sent a delegation within 6 hours. Then, I thought about an old woman standing in a street, looking at an armored foreign soldier, for 11 minutes, and looking, by the account of one of my most reliable field officers, like she felt sorry for her. I turned to the intelligence officer. He was already looking at me. He raised his hand toward his helmet. "Don't," I said. He lowered his hand. "Get me everything we have on the historical record of this city," I said. "Not current. Historical. How many times has it been invaded?" He checked. He came back 3 minutes later. He read me the list. It was a long list. I drank my warm nutrient suspension. I did not taste it. I was thinking about mud and pavement and drainage conduits and an old woman who had lived in a city that had been on that list, had been on that list multiple times, and had stood in the street for 11 minutes and found it in herself to feel sorry for the soldiers doing the invading. I was thinking about what it does to a species, that list. What it teaches them. What it builds into them, generation after generation, as a thing so ordinary it does not even register as remarkable. The way they teach their children to survive not just the current invasion but every invasion in perpetuity, because the list has taught them that there will always be another one. The way that knowledge, encoded not in doctrine, not in training, but in the cellular memory of a people who had been doing this for 10,000 years, produces a woman who can stand in a street and look at you with patience and grief and something that is not quite pity but contains pity as one of its component parts. I looked at the map. I looked at the city. I thought, we have been reading this wrong from the beginning. I did not write that in the log. I thought it, and I held it, and outside the city hummed on its electrical grid, and somewhere someone was cooking, and the hum was very steady, and I did not write any of it down because I was not yet sure what it meant. But I was beginning to. On day 6, the city started making noise. Not weapons fire. Not structural collapse. Not the specific frequency signature of tactical communications being broadcast on hardened channels. Noise. Music, specifically. My secondary auditory system picked it up first, a register I typically use for ambient monitoring, the background static of environmental data that I process but do not consciously attend to unless something flags as anomalous. The flag came at approximately 0800. I pulled focus. The signal was coming from the eastern residential sector, from multiple sources simultaneously, with a coherence that suggested coordination but a variety that suggested the coordination was not regimented. I reached for the right category and could not find one. It was organized chaos. Multiple inputs in different keys, different tempos, different tonal registers, all occurring at the same time and somehow not canceling each other out. Somehow adding up to a single thing instead of several separate noises. The intelligence officer called it singing. I told him I was aware it was singing. I asked him what it meant tactically. He said he did not know. I asked him what it meant at all. He said, the historical record suggests it's a form of, they have done it before. Under siege. As a communication of intent. He pulled up his data. We have records of this specific city doing this in multiple previous conflict events. There is documentation going back approximately 500 years of the population using coordinated public music as a form of resistance expression. Resistance expression, I repeated. It communicates, he said carefully, that the population does not perceive its own defeat as imminent. I sat with that. 412 warships, I said. Yes, sir. And they are singing. Yes, sir. I stood at the command post viewport and looked at the city. From above, it looked like every city we had approached in 14 operations, dense, geometric, the specific organized complexity of a species that had built upward because it had run out of room to build outward. It looked like a city that should have complied within 48 hours. It looked, from the outside, like a city that understood its situation. And it was singing. I turned to the intelligence officer. Get me Nowak. She came in on a pair of fabricated crutches our medical officer had constructed. Their design was not in the compact standard kit, and the medical officer had consulted with Nowak herself on the specifications, which I had noted at the time as a protocol deviation and had said nothing about. She sat down across from me. She was moving better than she had 3 days ago. The leg was knitting, our medical scans confirmed, at a rate our biological database classified as accelerated healing, anomalous. Their bones, I had learned by this point, healed at a rate approximately 40% faster than compact standard species, and the medical officer had flagged this with some discomfort, healed stronger at the break site. The calcium matrix reknits denser at the point of fracture. They become, in the specific location of their injury, harder to break again. I had logged this. I had logged it 6 times, not 3, which was the only time in my career I had deviated from my own notation protocol. You're listening, she said. Not a question. She could tell from something in my posture, presumably, or perhaps the single viewport in the room was enough to orient her. She was orienting on sounds I probably could not perceive with my primary auditory system. Yes, I said. The singing. She adjusted the crutches. Looked at me. There was something in her expression that I had begun to recognize over the past 2 days, a kind of readiness, a forward-leaning quality that her stillness did not contradict. She was always still and always ready simultaneously. I was not sure my species had a word for that combination. What does it mean? I said. What do you think it means? I think, I said, it means they are not afraid. She tilted her head slightly. Keep going. I think, I said more slowly, it means they are doing it for each other. Not for us. We are not the intended audience. She looked at me with the expression I had been logging as assessment. Yeah, she said. That's right. But, they know we can hear it. Sure. So it serves a secondary purpose, I said. As communication toward us. Does it? Yes, I said. Because the only logical secondary implication of public music in a city under siege, music that communicates we are not afraid, is that we should be. She said nothing. The singing was audible even in this room, very faint through the containment walls, a layering of frequencies that my secondary system registered as, I do not have a precise word for this. Warm. It registered as warm, which is not a category in my acoustic analysis systems and, which I noted in the log as anomalous phenomenological response, undetermined cause, further analysis pending. Who started it? I said. I don't know. Someone did. Someone always does, she said. And, then, other people hear it and, they start. And, then, other people hear them. She thought for a moment. It doesn't require a command structure. You don't need someone to order it. You just need someone to start. I thought about this. About the implications of a tactic that required no coordination, no command infrastructure, no communication between actors. A tactic that propagated by itself, through the act of being heard. And it tells people, I said slowly, that other people are still here, she said. Yeah. Still here. I looked at the floor for a moment. The crutch she was using had a small scuff mark on the left grip. I had been looking at it since she came in. The scuff was in the shape of nothing. It was not in the shape of anything. It was a scuff mark on a fabricated crutch. I looked at it anyway. We are not equipped for this, I said. I had not meant to say it aloud. It came out before I had assessed whether it belonged in this conversation. She looked at me. The assessment expression again. But, there was something else in it now, something I had not seen before. Not pity, exactly. Something adjacent to pity that contained respect as a component. No, she said. You're not. On day 7, the resistance blew the bridge. Not a small bridge. The main transit bridge over the river that bisected the city, a structure approximately 800 meters in length, 40 meters above the waterline, capable of bearing the full weight of our heaviest ground units. We had been using it. We had been using it because our engineering team had assessed it as structurally sound and, because the river was not fordable at any point within the city proper and, because crossing it had taken 11 hours of logistical work to establish. They blew it with precision charges. 11 of them, spaced with a regularity that our engineering officer described, with what I recognized as involuntary admiration, as textbook. The 11 hours of logistical work became 0. Our heavy units were on the wrong side of the river. The city had a river again. I stood at the command post and looked at the sensor feed showing the bridge in the process of collapsing into the river, which it was doing in sections, with the specific geometric elegance of something that had been designed to fall in a particular direction and was doing exactly that. The intelligence officer said, "They would have needed, I know what they would have needed," I said. "They would have needed engineering knowledge. They would have needed charges. They would have needed time to place them without our sensors detecting the thermal signatures. They would have needed, and this was the part one was currently occupying, people who knew exactly how much time we had been giving them by using the bridge, which meant they had been monitoring our patterns long enough to know exactly when the bridge would be worth destroying and when it wouldn't. We had been using the bridge for 3 days. They had let us use it for 3 days. I stood at the viewport for a long time. The bridge was mostly down. The river was cold and moving fast. Our temperature sensors read it at just above freezing, which for our species was a serious obstacle to unassisted crossing. For theirs, I did not know. I pulled up the biological database. Found the relevant entry under thermal tolerance, Homo sapiens, read it. Read it again. Made a note in my log. 6 times. Tell the heavy units to begin fording assessment, I said. The intelligence officer turned to look at me. "Sir, the water temperature is," "I know what the water temperature is," I said. "Do a fording assessment." He did. He came back 40 minutes later. He said, "The humans can ford it. The water temperature is within survivable range for unassisted crossing by a human in appropriate gear. It's cold, sir, extremely cold, but they can cross it." "Can we?" He was quiet for a moment. "Not without heated wading equipment, sir. Our thermal regulation systems aren't designed for extended contact with water at that temperature." I looked at the map. I looked at the bridge. They had not just cut our supply line and removed our heavy unit access. They had divided the city into a portion we could operate in and a portion that was, naturally, as a function of the local environment, as a function of the specific temperature of a northern river in a city they had lived in their entire lives, viable for them and not for us. "Find me a way across," I said. "Yes, sir." "And find me the engineering officer who assessed the bridge as structurally sound." There was a pause. "Yes, sir." I went back to my warm nutrient suspension. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. VES-on came to see me on day 8. She was not due to report until day 9. She stood in the entrance to the command post with the posture of someone who had made a decision she was not certain about, which I had seen from VES-on exactly once before in 7 years of working together. "Sit," I said. She sat. "What happened?" She told me. She had been running a patrol through a sector that was, by our operational maps, cleared. Standard route, confirmation sweep, no contact expected. At approximately 1600, she had passed through a block of residential buildings, the kind we had been flagging as indeterminate, the ones we couldn't distinguish from hardened positions, and found a child in the street. Not a trap. Or not, as she described it, obviously a trap. A child, approximately 6 or 7 years by their biological standards, sitting in the middle of the road with what she described as a small mechanical device with moving parts, which the translation matrix offered several possible identifications for and which I was fairly confident was a toy. The child had looked up at VES-on and her patrol and said something. "What did they say?" I asked. "The translation matrix gave me 2 possible interpretations," she said. "Either are you going to leave soon or do you know you are going to lose?" The Matrix flagged it as ambiguous idiomatic phrasing. I thought about that for a moment. What did you do? I stood there, she said. For about probably 10 seconds. Then, one of the patrol members started to move toward the child. Protocol unaccompanied juvenile, verify welfare, and the child stood up and went inside a building. Just stood up, took the toy, went inside. No fear. No running. She looked at the floor. Like we were the ones who were supposed to be nervous. I thought about Nowak. About the old woman in the street. About 11 minutes and cooking smells and singing. They've been doing this for a long time, I said. What? This, I said. All of it. Not the tactics, specifically. The capacity to remain functional under occupation. Under threat. To maintain normalcy. I turned to the window. The city was lit at night. They had not lost their power grid despite 3 attempts by our technical teams to disrupt it, which was a separate problem I had stopped assigning to the same category as the other problems because it was beginning to take up too much space in my operational assessment. There's a word in our language, I said, for the rational acceptance of a correct loss. Velshan, every species we have encountered has some version of it. The moment they stop, and assess, and accept the mathematics. The Yeson was quiet. We have not seen it, I said. 7 days. We have not seen a single behavioral indicator of a population in the process of accepting a correct loss. Maybe they don't agree it's correct, she said. I looked at her. She shrugged, a motion she had picked up somewhere, I suspected from watching the human prisoners and detainees we had briefly held before the prisoner exchange that had returned all of them except Nowak. Maybe they ran the numbers, she said, and came up with a different answer. That's not possible, I said. The numbers are the numbers. 412, I know, sir. She said it quietly. Not arguing. Just noting something. I know what the numbers say. She left. I stood at the window for a long time. The city was still lit. The singing had stopped, but I knew it would start again. It started every morning now, for approximately 2 hours, and it had the quality, I had begun to notice this, of something that expected to continue. Not a last act. A routine. They had turned resistance into a routine. I went to see Nowak. She was awake. She was always awake when I came, which I suspected meant either that she did not sleep much or that she always heard me coming. Both seemed plausible. I sat down. I did not bring the data pad. 7 days, I said. Your city is still, the city is still functional. You have a power grid. You have a communication network that we have been unable to fully disrupt. You have personnel conducting operations we cannot fully predict, using techniques that are, some of them are older than our written record of your species' existence. I looked at the crutch grip. The scuff. And children who are not afraid of us. She waited. What are we missing? I said. It was not a professional question. I was aware, as I asked it, that I was asking a prisoner to help me understand the people resisting my operation, which violated approximately 4 sections of the Compact Codex and also a basic operational principle that I had held for my entire career. I asked it anyway. Nowak looked at me for a long time. Something shifted in her expression. Not the assessment look. Something older. More complicated. You keep talking about what you're missing, she said. Like there's a thing you could learn that would fix this. A weakness you haven't found yet. A pressure point. Yes, I said. There isn't one, she said. Every species has, not like that. She shook her head. Not dismissing me. Trying to explain something, I realized. Actually trying to explain it. You're thinking of this like a system. Like if you find the right input, you get the right output. Surrender. She looked at the wall. We don't work like that. It's not that there's no breaking point. There is. Obviously. Everything breaks. But, the breaking point isn't a place on the map or a system you can disrupt. She was quiet for a moment. It's a feeling. What feeling? That it's over, she said. That there's no point anymore. That the people next to you have given up. She looked back at me. And, the singing is how you know they haven't. I sat in the silence after that for a long time. The containment room had a very faint hum from the ventilation system, a different frequency from the city's electrical grid, but in the same general register. I had been hearing both for 7 days. I noticed, sitting there, that I had stopped being aware of the ventilation and started being aware of the city. The singing, I said. Yeah. It keeps them, it tells them that we're still here, she said. Every morning. Still here. I looked at the scuff mark on the crutch grip. I thought about the old woman in the street. About the child with the toy. About 40 to 60 people pulling up pavement in the dark because 4 minutes was worth the effort. We're not going to find the pressure point, I said. No, she said. You're not. Because it's not a point. No. I stood up. The performance evaluations would have had several things to say about this conversation. I did not particularly care about that. I cared about the map, and the bridge in the river, and the singing, and the woman sitting across from me with a leg that was healing stronger at the break and a patience I had no biological framework for. You said everything is temporary, I said. Including us. Yeah. You meant that the resistance will outlast this operation. She looked at me. The assessment expression, but softer. I meant what I said, she said. Everything is temporary. Including you. Including all of this. A small gesture, encompassing the containment room, the command post beyond it, the 412 ships presumably visible from any unobstructed point in the city above. You can win this. You probably will win this. Eventually. You have 412 ships. She said the number the way I said it, not with awe, with data. But, winning and ending are two different things. And, you know the difference. Or you're starting to. I left. I went back to the command post. I sat down with the cold nutrient suspension. I looked at the map of the city. I looked at it for a long time. Then, I pulled up the behavioral projection model, the 94.7% probability, 17 analysts, 3 months, and I looked at that too. I did not delete it. I would not delete it. But, I pulled up a new document alongside it and I started a different kind of assessment. Not predictions. Observations. Everything I had seen in 7 days that the model did not have a field for. The cooking. The mud. The pavement. The bridge. The singing. The child. The old woman. The scuff mark on the crutch grip that I had been looking at instead of the things I was not ready to look at directly. The bones that healed stronger at the break. I typed for a long time. I did not count how many times I wrote anything. Outside, the city hummed on its grid, steady and unbroken, and, somewhere in the eastern sector, very faint, someone was singing again. Not the morning chorus. A single voice, late, past the hour when it had stopped every other night. Still here. I typed, Day 7 observation note addendum. I typed, I do not think we understand what we are engaged in. I typed, I do not think we have understood it since the beginning. I saved the file. I looked at the city. I thought about Valoric, and his scar, and the performance evaluation language, and the word Velshan, and how it had stopped feeling like a concept that applied here. Then, I drank the cold nutrient suspension. And, I listened to the city. On day 9, I made a mistake. Not a tactical mistake. I had made plenty of those. This was a different kind, the kind that starts with a reasonable decision and ends with you understanding something you would have been more comfortable not understanding. I authorized the release of Nowak. The official reasoning was sound, exchange of cooperation data, low intelligence value relative to the operational friction her continued detention was causing with the local medical staff, standard humanitarian release under Compact Codex Section 14, Clause 7, which covered non-combatant detainees held beyond the standard assessment window. All of this was true. All of it was in the report. The actual reasoning, which I logged in the private addendum file that I had been maintaining parallel to the official record since day 4, was that I had spent 9 days talking to her and had come to the conclusion that she was telling me more by being honest with me than she ever would by being pressured, and that she was going to walk out of this containment room and back into that city, and the city was going to be exactly as impossible to pacify after she left as before, and that the difference between keeping her and releasing her was not tactical but personal. I wanted to see if she would look back. She did not look back. She walked out of the release point on the fabricated crutches, into the street, and did not turn around. She had, before she left, said one thing to me. Not the assessment look. Something else entirely. She had looked at me directly, not at the data pad, not at the wall, at me, and she had said, "You seem like someone who keeps records." "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. "Keep them." Then, she left. I thought about that for most of day 9. About what she meant by keep them. About who she thought might eventually read them. About whether she believed this operation would end in a way that left my records available to be read, and by whom, and in what context. I thought about it. I drank the nutrient suspension. I looked at the map. On day 10, the city coordinated. Not in the way we had been watching for it, not the massed assault, the prepared breach, the obvious military operation that our doctrine was optimized to repel. They coordinated the way they had been coordinating all along, which was to say in a way that was invisible from the outside until it was already happening and, then, very difficult to address because it was everywhere simultaneously. At 0600, the eastern sector cut power to grid segment 4. Not an attack, a reroute. They had, in the 9 days since the operation began, quietly rebuilt the power distribution network into a topology that did not match our grid maps. Our maps were accurate when we had compiled them. They were no longer accurate because the infrastructure had been changed. While we were rerouting sensor coverage to assess the grid disruption, the western sector started moving. Not soldiers. Personnel, and I am using that word specifically because the intelligence analysis was still unable to confirm military status on any of them. Personnel, in groups of 3 to 8, moving through the transit tunnels, the ones we had identified on day 4, the ones that had been used as concealed movement corridors. They were moving material. What material? We did not know for approximately 2 hours. 2 hours was, it turned out, what they needed. At 0800, our Southern Advance Team attempted to move through Sector 12. Sector 12 had been, by every assessment we had run over the preceding 48 hours, clear. No weapon signatures. No elevated thermals. Sensor confirmation from 4 separate drone passes. The advance team found a barricade. Not a weapons emplacement. A barricade, the kind constructed from available urban material, from the specific physical vocabulary of a city that has been doing this, in one form or another, since before it had a name. Furniture. Vehicles. Structural materials from a building that had been partially disassembled for the purpose. And, behind the barricade, not soldiers, a population. The eastern sector had cut the power to draw our sensor attention. The western sector had moved the material while we were looking at the wrong thing. And, the people who lived in Sector 12 had spent the night building something that was not a weapons position and, was not a military installation and, was not anything our tactical doctrine had a clear response protocol for, because it was made of their homes and, they were standing in front of it and, they were not armed and, our rules of engagement had 11 specific provisions about the use of force against non-combatants. 11 minutes in Sector 9. 11 provisions in the Codex. 11 charges on the bridge. I had stopped believing in coincidence by day 7. I had not yet figured out what to replace it with. VSON called me. She said, "Sir, the barricade it's substantial. And, the people behind it are not moving," I said. "No, sir. How many? Best estimate, 300 in this sector alone. We're getting reports of similar structures going up in sectors 4, 7, and 11. I think they've been planning this since the first day. I looked at the map. Sectors 4, 7, 11, 12. Not random. Not clustered. Distributed, one in each quadrant of the city. For barricades, simultaneously, on the morning of day 10. They had used 8 days to learn where our advance routes were. Stand down, I said. Sir? Stand down the advance teams. Hold positions. I looked at the map. Get me primary strategos command. There was a pause. I had not requested primary strategos command since before the operation began. The pause meant that requesting it now would require me to explain why, which would require me to explain what I was going to say, which I had not fully determined yet. But I knew the beginning of it. I had known it since day 7, probably. I had known it since Veloric. I had known it before that, if I was being honest, in the way that private addendum files are for being. I knew it the first time Nowak had said invasion and looked at me with the patience of someone who had already seen this before. Primary strategos command came on at 0930. The primary strategos was Venkarith, who I had worked under for 4 years and who had a particular way of listening that I had always interpreted as patience and was now interpreting as something more uncomfortable, the specific stillness of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for you to reach the same one. I gave my report. All of it, the bridge, the mud, the pavement, the singing, the barricades, the grid reroute. The behavioral projection model versus the 9 days of actual data. I was concise. I had been trained to be concise. I gave the numbers. When I was done, Venkarith was quiet for approximately 6 seconds. Your assessment, he said. The pacification operation is currently structured, I said, cannot produce a compliant outcome within acceptable operational parameters. The resistance model employed by the local population does not respond to the pressure points our doctrine is designed to exploit. They are not operating from a command structure that can be decapitated. They are not protecting material resources that can be denied. The morale infrastructure is distributed through the civilian population itself, which means, Venkarith said, that to break it, we break them. Yes, sir. All of them. Yes, sir. Another 6 seconds. That is not, he said, in the operational mandate. No, sir. The operational mandate specifies a compliant outcome achieved through the minimum necessary application of force. Minimum necessary force against a distributed resistance model, if the resistance is genuinely distributed through the entire civilian population, is not minimum. No, sir. I waited. The calm line had a faint static pattern that I had been listening to for 9 days and that I had developed, against my professional judgment, a kind of familiarity with. It was a frequency I associated now with this planet, with this city, with this operation. With the specific quality of being in a place that refused to be what you expected it to be. What is your recommendation, Strategos Velsen? I thought about Nowak walking out of the release point and not looking back. I thought about the old woman in the street. About VSN coming to my office on day 8 with that look on her face. About the child with the toy who had looked up at a fully armed patrol and asked them, calmly, whether they knew they were going to lose. About the bones that healed stronger at the break. My recommendation, I said, is to open communications with the local governance structure, if one can be identified, and request a formal dialogue under Compact Codex Section 22. Section 22 was the section nobody used. It was the section for when you were not pacifying, when you were negotiating. When you had arrived to annex and had found, instead, something you needed to actually talk to. Venkarith was quiet for a long time. Then, he said, that recommendation will require a substantial justification document, Strategos. Yes, sir. It will be reviewed at the highest level. Yes, sir. It may not be approved. I understand, sir. You are aware, he said, That this will, the implications for the operations timeline, the resource commitment, the signal it sends to other planetary systems and the expansion zone. Yes, sir, I said. I'm aware of all of it. Another pause. The static on the comm line. The city, outside, humming on its grid. Write the document, he said. And, disconnected. I wrote for 3 hours. I wrote about Valoric and the drainage conduit and what sepsis meant in a species that had been fighting bacterial warfare on the cellular level for 4 billion years. I wrote about the pavement and the bridge and the mud and what it meant that a species had encoded Cold War tactical thinking into its basic civilian skill set without ever officially classifying it as military knowledge. I wrote about the singing, and what Nowak had told me about it, and the specific difference between a population in the process of accepting defeat and a population that had simply never been introduced to the concept. I wrote about Velshan and the fact that it had no equivalent in their language. That this was not an accident. That this was a thing worth spending considerable attention on. I wrote, the relevant question is not whether this population can be made to comply. The relevant question is what compliance, achieved against a distributed resistance model of this type, would actually mean. Whether a compliant outcome is distinguishable, in practice, from an outcome in which the resistance has simply gone underground, has become invisible, and is waiting. I wrote, humans do not, as a species, abandon a goal. They modify their approach. They go dormant if necessary. They wait. The historical record of this specific city over the past 1,000 years is a record of, they have been occupied 14 times. They have never stopped being themselves. I wrote, I believe the Compact's primary strategic error in this operation has been categorical. We categorized this as a pacification operation. A pacification operation assumes a binary outcome, compliance or escalation, and escalation eventually exhausts itself. We assumed that extended engagement would deplete the resistance. We did not account for the possibility that extended engagement is the terrain on which they are strongest. I paused there. Looked at the screen. Looked at the map. Then, I wrote, they are not exhausted by resistance. They are constituted by it. The resistance is not a tactic they are employing. It is who they are. You cannot deplete it without depleting them entirely. And, depleting them entirely is not an outcome the Compact's operational mandate covers. Therefore the mandate is wrong for this situation. Therefore the situation requires a different kind of engagement. I saved the document. Then, I went to see VS On. She was in the equipment bay, which was the habit she had when she did not want to be found, which she had told me years ago was the best place to be unfindable because anyone who came looking would be slightly embarrassed to have looked there first. I sat on an equipment crate across from her. I filed the Section 22 recommendation, I said. She looked at me. How'd that go? He told me to write the document. And, you wrote it? Just finished. She was quiet. She was doing the thing she did sometimes, looking at the middle distance, processing something at a speed I couldn't quite follow. Then, she said, do you think they'll approve it? I don't know. Do you think it matters if they don't? I thought about that. What do you mean? I mean, she looked at the floor. 14 previous occupations. That's what the record says, right? 14. And, the city is still there. The people are still there. Still cooking. Still singing. She looked up. Whether the Compact approves Section 22 or not, they're going to still be there. After us. Singing. I thought about Nowak saying everything's temporary. About including you. Yes, I said. They will. So the Section 22 isn't for them, she said. Is it? I looked at her. It's for us, she said. It's so we don't have to be the 15th. I sat with that for a long time. The equipment bay had a ventilation system with a slightly irregular cycle. It ran longer than standard, then, paused, then, corrected. I had learned to identify the sound by now. I associated it with the quiet hours, with the late shifts when the command post was down to skeleton staff and the city was still and the only sound was the grid hum and, occasionally, faintly, the singing. Yes, I said. That's what it's for. The Section 22 was approved 11 days later. Not immediately. Not without resistance of a different kind, internal this time, compact bureaucratic friction, the specific institutional inertia of an organization that had not done this in 40 years. There were 3 review cycles. 2 requests for supplementary data. 1 very uncomfortable conference call with the expansion zone director that I have elected not to include in this record because the things said in it were not technically relevant to the operational outcome and, because I found them personally, I will use the word clarifying. They were clarifying in the way that certain conversations clarify the exact nature of the distance between what an institution says it is and what it does. But it was approved. The ground operation was suspended on day 21. Formal dialogue opened on day 23. I will not describe the dialogue here, that is a different record, maintained by different people, with classification levels I do not have access to despite having been technically present for 3 of the initial sessions. What I will describe is the morning of day 21. The morning the suspension order came through and I walked out of the command post into the city for the first time in 19 days without tactical parameters. Not on a patrol. Not under escort. Just out. It was early. The city was doing the thing it always did at this hour, which I had listened to for 19 days through walls and sensors and the secondary auditory system and which I was now, for the first time, hearing directly. The singing had started. I stood in the street for a while and listened to it. From here, from street level, it was not one sound. It was many sounds that had found a way to exist simultaneously without canceling each other. Each voice doing its own thing and somehow adding up to a single thing. I did not know the song. I did not need to. A woman came out of a building to my left. She stopped when she saw me. We looked at each other. She was old, her hair was white, her face was deeply lined, her eyes were the specific dark blue that I had catalogued as a recessive genetic trait appearing in approximately 12% of the local population. She was not afraid. She was not hostile. She looked at me with the expression I had spent 19 days trying to classify and had finally, the night before, given up classifying and simply named. Recognition. She recognized something in me. Or recognized the moment, this specific kind of moment, which was not the first one and which she knew would not be the last one, but which was this one, today, the 21st day of an operation that was now something other than what it had been. She said something. My translation matrix gave me, about time, with a confidence rating of 63%, and also it was always going to come to this, with a confidence rating of 51%, and I suspected both of them were right and neither was complete. I did not say anything. I did not know what to say. She went back inside. I stood in the street and listened to the city sing. I am writing this final entry not in the official record that has been submitted, reviewed, partially redacted, and filed under a classification level that I believe was chosen specifically because it is embarrassing, but in the private addendum file that I began on day 4 of the operation and have maintained without interruption since. I am writing it because Nowak told me to keep records. Because some things need to be said in plain language, outside the official frameworks. Here is what I know. 412 warships. 21 days. The full operational capacity of the compact 9th expansion fleet deployed against a single city on a planet that had not yet developed faster than light travel. We did not break them. They were willing to be broken, if broken is the right word for the thing that happens when you decide the cost is worth paying. And the cost was very high. Higher than our official casualty assessments reflect. But they were willing. We were not. That is the thing I have been thinking about since day 21. The gap between willing and able, which side of it we were each on. They were willing to continue. We were not. Not because we were afraid. Not because we lacked the capacity. Because we had looked at what continuing would require and found that requiring it was not something we could put in a document and defend. They knew that before we did. Nowak knew it. The old woman in the street knew it. The child with the toy almost certainly knew it. They knew that our willingness was the limited resource, not theirs. They had been waiting for us to run out. I have been trying to find the right word for what I have learned from this operation, and I have not found it. My language does not have it. I have looked in the standard compact lexicon and it is not there either. The closest I have come is a word in their own language, not a famous word, not a grand philosophical concept, just a small ordinary word they apparently use all the time without treating it as remarkable. The word is resilience. Their lexicons define it as the capacity to recover from difficulty. To adapt. To continue. What it does not convey, in the definition, is what I now understand about it, that it is not passive. That it is not the absence of breaking. It is the active, chosen, daily decision to be the thing that does not stay broken. To stand up. To cook. To sing in the morning. To look at a fully armed foreign soldier and feel, not fear, but something that contains pity as one of its components. To heal stronger at the break. I wrote that in the private log 6 times. I have written it 6 times every day since day 7. I will probably continue to do so. There is a word in my language for the rational grief of accepting a correct loss. Velshan, I have used it in my official reports. I have used it to describe our revised operational posture, our transition to dialogue, they would call it standing down, though we do not use that phrase. I have not used it to describe them. They did not accept a correct loss. They refused to classify it as correct. And, in refusing, they changed what it was. I do not know what to call that. I know I will spend a long time trying to find the word. The city is still singing. I can hear it now. Through the walls of the temporary command post that is, as of today, beginning the process of becoming a temporary liaison office, which is a different thing entirely. Everything is temporary, she said. Including us. She was right. She was right about all of it. I am going to have to figure out what to do with that. End of day 21. End of the operation. Beginning, I do not know. Something else. Something I do not have a word for yet. I am going to keep looking.